The station, called Valeth Co., hung in the darkness of space like a metal fist clenched around a dying star, and inside that fist lived every kind of killer the galaxy had ever produced. Cale Drennan arrived on a cargo shuttle that looked like it had been welded together from the wreckage of 3 different ships, and when the docking clamps grabbed hold of the hull, the entire vessel groaned like a wounded animal breathing its last breath. He stepped off the ramp into the main concourse, and the noise hit him like a wall. Thousands of alien voices speaking hundreds of languages, the clang of weapons being tested, the deep rumble of engines somewhere far below, and the constant hum of energy shields keeping the vacuum of space on the other side of the walls. Nobody looked at him twice. He was human, and humans in this part of the galaxy were about as impressive as dirt on a boot. Cale was tall, but thin in a way that suggested he had gone hungry more times. Then he had eaten well, and he wore a long coat that had been patched so many times it was hard to tell what color it had started as. And beneath the coat he wore armor plates that did not match each other because they had clearly been taken from different sets over many years. But it was his skin that told the real story. His face carried a deep burn scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, and across his neck there were thin white lines where blades had opened his flesh, and someone had sealed the wounds in a hurry without caring about how it would look. And his hands were a mess of old damage, missing the tip of one finger, knuckle joints swollen and crooked from breaks that had healed wrong, and the faint chemical staining of someone who had survived an acid attack. His left eye was gone, replaced by a cybernetic implant so cheap and old that the red glow of its lens flickered every few seconds like a candle about to go out. That he tried to hide, and could not. He made his way through the crowds toward the Hall of Brands, the great arena at the heart of Valeth Co., where mercenary companies came to buy soldiers, and soldiers came to sell the only thing they had left, their ability to fight and die for whoever paid the most. The hall was enormous, built like a coliseum with rising tiers of seats surrounding a central evaluation floor. And today it was packed, because 3 major contracts had just been posted, and every mercenary outfit in the sector was looking for fresh bodies. Down on the floor, warriors from dozens of species were being tested and displayed like livestock at an auction. A pair of Gorath warriors, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, with skin like gray stone and arms thick as tree trunks, were lifting massive weights and roaring at each other in a display of raw power that made the floor vibrate. A Velinari blade dancer moved through a combat routine with 4 curved swords, her movements so fast and fluid that she looked like liquid silver given a deadly shape. A Drell mystic sat cross-legged in the air itself, suspended by psionic energy, casually bending metal bars with nothing but his mind, while the crowd murmured in appreciation. Cale watched all of this with his one good eye and his one flickering mechanical eye, and felt nothing at all. When his number was called, he walked down the steps to the evaluation floor, and the Telvanni assessor, a tall insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the arena lights like broken glass, scanned him with a device that hummed and clicked. The assessor read the results and made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been disgust. "Human," the assessor announced, his voice amplified so the entire hall could hear. "Unaugmented, no psionic signature. Extensive tissue damage across 93% of the body surface. Substandard. Cybernetic replacement in the left eye socket. Evidence of multiple fractures healed without proper medical intervention. Rated expendable class." The hall erupted in laughter. It came from every tier, every species, every throat that could produce the sound. A wave of mockery that crashed down on the evaluation floor like something physical. A Gorath warrior in the front row leaned forward and spat a glob of thick saliva that landed near Cale's boots, and the alien's deep voice rumbled through the laughter. "Send the scarred thing to the corpse pits. That is all humans are good for. They break too easy, and they scream too loud." More laughter. A Velinari officer turned to her companion and said something in her own language that made them both hiss with amusement. And even the Telvanni assessor's mandibles were clicking in what passed for a smile among his kind. Kale stood in the center of all of it and did nothing. He did not flinch, he did not look down. He did not clench his fists, or set his jaw, or do any of the things a proud warrior might do when his honor was being ground into the dirt. He simply stood there, with his scarred hands hanging loose at his sides, and his mismatched eyes looking at nothing in particular. And he waited. And that was when Commander Syra Voss leaned forward in her seat. Syra was Aelith, tall and lean with skin the color of polished silver, and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on a face that was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. And she commanded the Void Reapers, a mercenary company that had seen better days and was now scrambling for contracts just to keep fuel in the engines. Her second officer, a hulking Kalani reptilian named Breath, saw her expression and made a low warning sound in his throat. "Commander, no." "I want him," Syra said. "He is rated expendable," Breath said. "He is human, he is damaged, and he will be dead within a week of any real combat," Syra said quietly. "Look at him," Syra said quietly. Breath looked and saw nothing but a scarred, broken human, standing alone on the arena floor, while the galaxy laughed at him. Syra saw something else. She saw a man standing in the center of hostile territory, surrounded by creatures that could tear him apart with their bare hands. And his heart rate, visible on the assessor's scan display, still hovering in the air, had not increased by a single beat. He was not pretending to be calm. He was calm. And that, Syra thought, was either the mark of someone too stupid to understand danger, or someone who had seen so much danger that this did not even register. She bought his contract for 600 credits, less than the cost of a decent meal on Valeth Co. As Kale was escorted from the arena floor toward the Void Reapers section of the docking ring, a young alien officer, barely out of training, with bright, curious eyes, fell into step beside him. "Human," the young officer said, "I have never seen so many scars on one body that was still breathing. How did you get them all?" Kale kept walking, his limbs steady, his eyes forward. "I survived," he said. The young officer laughed because he thought it was a joke. Kale did not laugh. He kept walking, and his footsteps echoed in the corridor, and somewhere behind him the Hall of Brands was still full of laughter aimed at the place where he had stood, and none of it mattered to him at all, because he had heard worse sounds than laughter. He had heard the screams of everyone he had ever fought beside, as they died and he did not, one after another, war after war, world after world, until the scars on his body became a map of everyone he had failed to save. That was the weight he carried, and it was heavier than anything the galaxy could throw at him. The Void Reaper's cruiser was called the Talon of Regret, and it was the kind of ship that had been repaired so many times that almost nothing original remained. And Kale felt right at home on it, because he understood what it meant to be rebuilt from broken pieces. They assigned him to 8th Lance. Every mercenary company had a unit like 8th Lance, even if they did not admit it. The bottom squad, the expendables, the ones you sent in first so the enemy would waste ammunition on bodies that nobody would miss. The squad leader was a Kalani reptilian named Torsh, who had scales the color of dried blood, and a missing arm that had been replaced with a crude mechanical limb that clicked and whirred when he moved it. And the first thing Torsh did when Kale walked into the barracks was look at him the way a man looks at something stuck to the bottom of his boot. "A human," Torsh said to the rest of the squad. "They have given us a human, as if we were not already the joke of the company." The other squad members laughed, and there were 6 of them, a pair of Gorath brothers who had been demoted for fighting their own officers, a thin, nervous Drell, who had lost most of his psionic ability in a brain injury. A one-eyed Velinari female who moved with a permanent hunch from a spinal wound, and a small furry Tessic who never spoke, and whose file said only, disciplinary transfer. They were all broken in their own way, and broken people do not like mirrors, and Kale, with his map of scars, was the biggest mirror in the room. He said nothing to any of them, and found an empty bunk, and sat down and began checking his gear, with the quiet focus of a man who had done the same thing 10,000 times before. The Talon of Regret jumped to hyperspace that night, bound for Sereth Prime, a jungle moon where the Void Reapers had been contracted for garrison duty. Low risk, low pay, the kind of job you took when you could not get anything better. During the transit, Kale trained with the rest of 8th Lance in the ship's combat simulators and on the sparring mats, and what the others saw confirmed everything they already believed about humans. He was slower than the Goroth. He was less precise than the Velinari. He was less durable than the Kelani. He could not match the Drell's remaining psionic flickers, or the Tessic's ability to squeeze into spaces no other species could reach. He was average in every category and exceptional in none. And Torsch made sure everyone knew it by announcing Kale's simulation scores to the entire barracks each evening with the kind of satisfaction that only a bully can produce. But Commander Syra Voss watched the training feeds from her quarters, and she saw things that Torsch was too proud and too stupid to notice. She saw that Kale never made a wasted movement, not one, not ever. Every step was placed with purpose, every weapon reload shaved, down to the absolute minimum number of motions. Every turn of his body calculated to expose the least amount of himself to threat. She saw that every time he entered a room, any room, the mess hall, the latrine, the barracks, his eyes moved in the same pattern, mapping exits first, then cover positions, then sight lines, then potential weapons, all of it done in less than 2 seconds before he appeared to relax. She saw that in ambush simulations, when alarms blared and lights went red and holographic enemies appeared from nowhere, every other soldier in 8th Lance flinched or froze or charged forward on instinct. But Kale simply dropped, found cover, assessed the threat, and began responding with a precision that looked mechanical. He was not fast, but he was never surprised. He was not strong, but he was never out of position. He was not impressive, but he was never dead at the end of a simulation when others were. Syra pulled his personnel file from the Concordance military database and found that most of it had been painted black with redaction marks so thick that the remaining visible text read like a poem, with most of the words torn out. What she could read was a list of units and conflicts, fragments that should not have fit together, but did. He had served with the 44th Human Volunteer Brigade on Kellis 7. That unit had been wiped out to the last soldier during a Kreth Dominion offensive. No survivors listed, except somehow Kale's service record continued after that date. He had been attached to a Velinari Rapid Assault Force during the Drell Corridor campaign. That force had been ambushed and destroyed in a catastrophic intelligence failure. No survivors listed, except Kale's record continued. He had been part of a multi-species garrison on Torvin Station when it was boarded by Kreth Void Raiders. The station was lost with all hands. No survivors listed, except Kale's record continued. 4 conflicts, 4 destroyed units, 4 times listed among the dead. And 4 times the record simply kept going, as if the universe had not gotten the message that this man was supposed to stop breathing. Syra felt something cold move through her chest as she read, and she was not a creature who frightened easily. She dug deeper, using old intelligence contacts and favors she had been saving, and she found one document that had not been fully redacted. An after-action report from the Siege of Holven 4. The report described a mountain pass on a frozen world, where a human brigade of 800 soldiers had been ordered to hold the line against a Kreth Dominion assault force of 22,000. and the humans were told that reinforcements were coming in 5 days. The reinforcements did not come in 5 days. They came in 19. When the relief force finally reached the pass, they found the ground so thick, with Kreth dead, that you could walk a full kilometer without your boots touching soil. And among the dead, they found 7 humans still alive. 7 out of 800. The report noted, with clinical precision, that one of the 7 survivors had to be physically restrained and given a direct order to stop fighting, because he had continued to engage Kreth forces even after the relief troops arrived, even after the battle was over, as if some part of him had forgotten how to stop. The serial number of that survivor matched the serial number in Kale Drennan's file. Syra closed the file and sat in the dark of her quarters for a long time. She went to the barracks that night and found Kale sitting alone on his bunk in the dim light, his hands moving with mechanical precision as he disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled his weapon, and his scarred fingers did not hesitate or fumble, even once. "What are you?" she asked from the doorway. He did not look up. Tired, he. She opened her mouth to press further, to demand answers, to ask him how a man survives 4 annihilated units and walks away each time with nothing but new scars. But before she could speak, the ship's alarm systems screamed to life. Red light flooded every corridor, and the voice of the Talon's combat AI cut through the chaos with words that made Syra's silver blood run cold. "Alert! Hyperspace contacts detected at Sereth Prime. Signature analysis confirms Kreth Dominion Warhost. Estimated enemy strength 120,000 combat units. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill." The low-risk mission had just become a death sentence. Syra looked at Kale, and for the first time since she had bought his contract, she saw something change in his face. Not fear, not shock, but a kind of grim recognition. The expression of a man who had been here before and knew exactly what was coming. He finished reassembling his weapon. 3 quick clicks, and stood up from the bunk. "How long until reinforcements can reach us?" he asked, and his voice was steady. 14 days, Syra said. Kale nodded once as if she had told him the weather. "I have held longer," he said quietly, and then he walked past her toward the armory, his limp steady, his scarred hands already checking the charge on his sidearm. Behind him the alarms kept screaming, and the ship was full of running feet and raised voices and the sharp electric smell of weapons powering up. And somewhere in the dark of space, a Kreth warhost was falling towards Sereth Prime, like a fist aimed at everything Kale had left to lose, which was not much. Sereth Prime was a green hell, a jungle moon where the air was so thick with heat and moisture that it felt like breathing through a wet cloth, and the trees grew tall enough to block the sky. And everything that lived in the undergrowth either bit or stung or dissolved flesh on contact. 3,000 mercenaries dug in around the hyperspace relay station and waited for 120,000 Kreth to come kill them. The Kreth arrived on the 2nd day. They came down through the atmosphere in drop pods that split the clouds like black rain, and the pods hit the jungle canopy and crashed through the trees and buried themselves in the mud. And then they opened, and the Kreth came out. Kreth were built for war the way a blade is built for cutting, tall and armored in natural chitin plates the color of old bone, with 4 arms that ended in clawed hands strong enough to tear metal, and heads that were all jaw and teeth and small furious eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not even name. The first wave hit the northern perimeter at dawn, and the sound of it was something that Kale had heard before on other worlds and in other jungles, and it never got easier to listen to. The deep thunder of energy weapons, the wet crack of bodies coming apart, the screaming that started in alien throats and ended in silence. The mercenary lines held for 6 hours, and then they did not. 2 forward positions were overrun before midday, and the soldiers who survived came running back through the jungle with stories that made the others go pale. The Kreth were not just attacking, they were swarming, pouring through the trees in numbers so vast that killing them made no difference, because there were always more behind the dead. By nightfall, the mercenary commanders were arguing in the command post about retreat options. And none of the options were good, because there was nowhere to retreat to. The hyperspace relay was the only thing on Sereth Prime worth holding, and if they abandoned it, then 14 days of waiting for reinforcements meant nothing. The arguing stopped when the Kreth infiltration team came through the wall. They had crawled through the mud under the perimeter sensors, 9 of them, elite void raiders with black chitin and weapons built into their arms, and they hit the command post like a bomb going off in a small room. The first guard died before he could raise his weapon, a Kreth blade through the throat so fast it looked like a magic trick. The second guard fired once and missed, and then a Kreth was on top of him, and there was a sound like wet wood breaking. Commander Syra drew her sidearm and put 2 shots into the nearest Kreth, and saw the energy bolt splash against its armor like water against stone. And then a Kreth backhand caught her across the chest and threw her into the wall, and she felt ribs crack and tasted copper in her mouth. Ground and looked up and saw a Kreth standing over her, with its killing arm raised, the blade at the end of it already dark with someone else's blood. And she had time to think one clear thought. This is how it ends. The blade came down, and a scarred human hand caught the Kreth's arm. Kale had come through the door like something out of a nightmare. No announcement, no battle cry, just sudden and terrible presence. And he had caught the killing blow with his bare hand, and the bones in his fingers broke, and he did not care. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes, and the soldiers who survived it would talk about it for the rest of their lives. Kale fought the way no alien in that room had ever seen anything fight. Not with skill, not with grace, not with the elegant precision of a trained warrior, but with something older and more terrifying than any of those things. He fought with his hands when his weapon was knocked away. Fingers into a Kreth's eye socket. He fought with his teeth when his hands were pinned, biting through the soft tissue between chitin plates until alien blood filled his mouth. He fought with a broken piece of table leg when the Kreth disarmed him again, swinging it with both hands like a club until it shattered against a Kreth's skull. He fought with a rock he pulled from the shattered wall, with a Kreth's own severed arm that he ripped free and used as a weapon, with his forehead slammed into faces, with his knees driven into joints, with every part of his body turned into something that could hurt and break and kill. He took wounds that should have stopped him, a slash across the ribs that opened him to the bone, a stab through the left shoulder that would have dropped a Gorath from shock, a blow to the head that split his scalp and sent blood streaming into his eyes until the world must have been nothing but red. He did not stop. He killed 9 Kreth infiltrators, and when the last one fell, he stood in the middle of the ruined command post, breathing hard, with blood running down his face and his arms and his chest, some of it his and some of it not, and his broken hand was still clenched in a fist. Then he walked over to Sira and knelt beside her, and his hands, the same hands that had just torn aliens apart, became gentle as he checked her wounds and applied field dressings with a precision that spoke of long practice. 2 broken ribs, he said calmly, possible internal bleeding. You need to stay still. The surviving officers stared at him from the corners of the room where they had taken cover, and their eyes were very wide, and nobody was laughing at the scarred human anymore. Sira grabbed his wrist and pulled him close, and her 4 eyes were bright with pain and something else. The defenses are falling apart, she said. Our officers are dead or panicking. The other companies are talking about surrender. We have 14 days to hold, and we will not last 3 at this rate. You will, Kale said. How? Because you are going to let me show you how humans fight. She gave him tactical authority that night, and the other surviving commanders agreed, because they were out of options. and because they had seen the command post, and counted the Kreth dead, and realized that the scarred human who could barely pass a standard fitness evaluation had just done something that none of their best warriors could have done. Kale reorganized the defenses, and what he built was not a fortress. It was a trap disguised as weakness. He ordered controlled retreats on 3 fronts, pulling soldiers back in ways that looked like panic, but were carefully designed to draw the Kreth into kill zones, where pre-positioned explosives and crossfire lanes would shred them. And the alien commanders hated this, because every species in the galaxy, except humans, saw retreat as shame. But Kale looked at them with his mismatched eyes and said, "The Kreth believe retreat means weakness, which means retreat is the best bait we have. Let them think they are winning, and they will walk into the mouth of every trap we set." He created harassment teams, small groups of 3 or 4 fighters who would strike the Kreth camps at random intervals every few hours, day and night, never at the same time, never from the same direction, never hard enough to trigger a full response, but always hard enough to prevent rest. Humans invented this, he told Torsh, who was now listening to him with something that looked almost like respect. "We call it attrition. You deny the enemy sleep and food and peace, and you do it for days and weeks until their minds break before their bodies do." He turned the jungle itself into a weapon. Pit traps covered with leaves, deadfall logs rigged to swing from the canopy, false trails that led into swamps. The heavy Kreth would sink and drown, tripwires connected to noisemakers that would drive the Kreth's sensitive hearing into agony. And then he did something that made even Syra uncomfortable. He ordered the Kreth dead arranged in specific patterns outside the perimeter, posed in positions that exploited deep Kreth religious taboos about the treatment of fallen warriors. Because Kale had studied the Kreth, and he knew that a species of warriors could be shaken by things that had nothing to do with combat. "This is cruel," Syra said. "This is survival," Kale answered. "Cruelty is what they will do to us if we lose." By day 5, the Kreth had taken losses that stunned their own commanders. Thousands dead for almost no ground gained, their troops exhausted from sleepless nights, their morale cracking under the psychological assault of their own dead displayed like warnings. And Kale had not slept in 3 days. Torsh watched him brief the squad leaders that evening, standing in the dim light of the command bunker with fresh blood on his armor, and dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. And Kale's voice was steady, and his hands did not shake, and his orders were clear and precise. "Does he not feel it?" Torsh asked quietly to the old Velinari mercenary standing beside him. "The pain, the exhaustion, does he not feel any of it?" The old mercenary had fought in more wars than she could count, and she had seen many species break under the weight of combat. And she looked at Kale with her one remaining eye, and something in her expression was close to fear. "He feels all of it," she said. "That is what makes humans terrifying. They feel everything. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion, all of it. And they fight anyway, not because they cannot feel it, but because they have decided that feeling it does not matter." Torsh said nothing. He looked at his own mechanical arm, and then at Kale's scarred hands. The first time he understood that scars were not signs of weakness. They were receipts. Proof of every fight the universe had thrown at this human, and every fight this human had refused to lose. Day 10, and the world had shrunk. What had been a defensive perimeter spanning 2 kilometers of jungle was now a tight ring of shattered bunkers and fallen trees around the hyperspace relay station. And inside that ring, 900 soldiers were still alive out of the 3,000 who had started, and most of those 900 were wounded, and all of them were afraid. The jungle beyond the perimeter was on fire in 3 places where Kreth's siege weapons had turned the green canopy into columns of black smoke that rose into the sky like fingers pointing at something terrible, and the air tasted like ash and blood and the chemical burn of energy weapons that had been firing for so long The barrels were warping. Kale stood at the eastern wall, which was not really a wall anymore, but a pile of rubble and dead machinery stacked high enough to crouch behind. And he looked out at the Kreth lines and counted their banners and did the math in his head, the way he always did. 4 days. They needed to hold for 4 more days. He had not slept in 6, and the wound in his left side where a Kreth blade had found the gap in his armor 3 days ago was infected and hot to the touch, and his broken hand had been splinted, but the fingers were swollen and dark, and he could barely close them around a weapon grip. And there was a ringing in his ears from a concussion blast that had not gone away and probably never would. He could feel all of it, every single bit of it, and it did not matter. On the morning of day 10, the Kreth warlord Galtorek sent a transmission on every frequency, his voice deep and resonant, with the absolute confidence of a commander who had 100,000 warriors at his back, and knew that the small broken force in front of him was already dead, and simply had not fallen down yet. "Defenders of the relay," Galtorek said, "you have fought well, for mercenaries, and I offer you a warrior's choice. Surrender the relay, and you will be permitted to withdraw with your weapons and your wounded. Refuse, and I will send my final wave, and there will be nothing left of you but ash and a story no one will remember." The transmission cut, and the command bunker erupted in argument. The commanders of the 2 other mercenary companies, a Gorath captain named Brul, and a Velinari strategist named Lena, both turned to Syra, because she had become the de facto leader since Kale's tactics had kept them alive this long. "We should take the offer," Brul said, and his deep voice had none of the bravado left that Gorath warriors were famous for. "My fighters are spent. We cannot hold 4 more days. It is mathematics." "The Kreth do not honor surrender terms," Syra said. "You know this." "I know that dead soldiers cannot spend their pay," Brul answered. "And what does your human say?" Lena asked, with a tone that mixed respect and resentment in equal measure. "Measure." Syra looked at Kale, who was standing in the corner of the bunker, with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, and she could see the exhaustion in him, like a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders. "Kale," she said. He looked up, and his mismatched eyes moved across the faces in the room, alien faces from 6 species, all of them looking at him, all of them afraid, all of them waiting for something he was not sure he had left to give. "He is lying," Kale said. "Galtorek will not let us leave. The moment we open the gates, his troops will pour in, and the massacre will be the kind of thing the Kreth sing songs about for 100 years. "Then we are dead either way," Brul said. "No," Kale said, and something in his voice made the room go still. "We are not dead. We are in pain, and we are scared, and we are tired. But we are not dead, and there is a difference between those things that matters more than anything else in the universe. Right now." He pushed himself off the wall and walked to the center of the bunker, and he looked at each of them in turn. "I want to tell you something about my people," he said. Nobody spoke. "Humans come from a world called Earth, and Earth is a world that has been trying to kill us since the first day we opened our eyes on it. There were predators that were faster and stronger than us. There were diseases that could kill millions in a season. There were earthquakes and floods and fires and ice ages that buried entire continents. And we had no claws and no armor and no venom and no psionic gifts and no natural weapons of any kind." He paused, and in the silence the distant thunder of Kreth siege weapons rolling into position was the only sound. "We should have died. Every logical calculation says we should have gone extinct 1,000 times over. And do you know why we did not?" He looked at Brul, who could crush a human with one hand, at Len, whose reflexes were 5 times faster than any human nerve could fire. He looked at all of them, species that were stronger, faster, tougher, smarter in every measurable way. Because we refused, Kale said simply. That is the human secret. That is the only gift evolution gave us. Not strength, not speed, not armor. Just the stubborn, stupid, magnificent refusal to lie down and die when everything in the universe is telling us to quit. He pulled open his coat and his armor and showed them his torso, and the scars there were so dense and layered that there was almost no unmarked skin left. Burns and blade wounds and bullet holes and chemical marks, and the deep surgical lines of field medicine done in the dark with shaking hands. Every one of these is a place where something tried to kill me, he said, and every one of these is proof that it failed. Not because I am special, not because I am strong, but because when I was lying on the ground bleeding, and broken, and sure that I was going to die, some part of me, some small, stubborn, furious part, decided to get up one more time. He closed his armor and looked at them. I am not asking you to be unafraid. Fear is natural, and fear is honest, and any warrior who says they do not feel it is lying or dead. I am asking you to be afraid, and to hold the line anyway, to feel the pain and keep fighting, to want to run and choose to stay. He took a breath. 4 days. I am asking you for 4 days, and I am not asking you as a commander or a tactician. I am asking you as a man who has been where you are right now, standing in the ruins, outnumbered, outgunned, out of hope. And I am telling you that hope is not what keeps you alive. Will is what keeps you alive. The decision to take one more breath, and fire one more shot, and stand one more hour. The bunker was silent, and then Torsh stepped forward. The Kalani who had spat at the feet of humans had called Kale a joke, who had spent weeks making sure everyone knew how worthless he considered the scarred creature assigned to his squad. Torsh stepped forward and slammed his mechanical fist against his own chest, so hard the impact rang through the bunker like a bell. It was the Kalani oath of death, the vow that a warrior makes when he has chosen to die standing rather than live kneeling. One by one, others followed, fists and claws and tentacles and hands of every shape, striking chests and thoraxes and carapaces in the warrior salutes of a dozen different species. And the sound of it built like a drum beat until the bunker walls shook with it. Brule was last, and he stood for a long moment, looking at Kale with his stone-gray face unreadable. And then he raised both massive fists and brought them crashing together above his head, in the Gorath war pledge that had not been seen outside of Gorath homeworld ceremonies in 200 years. And they held. Day 11, the Kreth attacked with everything they had, and the defensive ring buckled, and reformed, and buckled again. And Kale was everywhere at once, on the eastern wall directing fire until his voice went hoarse, on the southern breach dragging wounded soldiers to cover with his broken hand while firing with the other, in the western trench fighting hand-to-hand with Kreth warriors who had gotten over the barricade. Day 12, a Kreth energy lance punched through his torso just below the ribs, and he fell and lay in the mud for 12 seconds. He counted them. And then he pulled a plasma torch from his belt and cauterized the wound himself, and the scream he made was heard across the entire perimeter. One raw animal sound of agony that he allowed himself before he clamped his jaw shut and stood up and kept fighting. Day 13, the Kreth broke through the last wall. The final barrier between the relay station and the Kreth army was a reinforced gate that had been designed to withstand orbital bombardment, and it lasted about 4 minutes under concentrated siege fire before it blew inward in a shower of molten metal and superheated air. Kale stood in the smoke and looked at the breach, and he could see the Kreth massing on the other side, hundreds of them, thousands, a tide of bone-white armor and killing arms, ready to pour through and end everything. He looked at Syra, who was beside him, with her silver skin streaked with dirt and blood, and her 4 eyes burning with a fierce light that he had come to respect more than almost anything else in his long and violent life. "Get everyone into the relay room," he said. "Barricade the doors. Hold until the fleet arrives." That is hours away, Cyrus said. What are you going to do? He bent down and picked up a weapon from the ground. Not his own weapon, but a massive war axe that had belonged to one of the fallen Gorath warriors. Metal and energy that was designed for hands 3 times the size of his and weighed more than a human should be able to carry. He lifted it, and his arms shook, and his infected wounds screamed, and his broken fingers could barely grip the handle. But he held it. He looked at Syra, and there was something in his eyes that was not resignation, and not courage, and not madness, but some combination of all 3, that only humans seemed capable of producing. Something human, he said, and he turned and walked toward the breach. The breach was 4 meters wide, and through it Kale could see the Kreth war host stretched across the burning jungle, like an ocean of bone-white armor. And the nearest warriors were already charging toward the gap, with their killing arms raised, and their mouths open in the war scream that had broken the morale of 100 species across 1,000 worlds. Kale walked into the gap and planted his feet. The war axe was too heavy for him, and he knew it. And his body was a catalog of damage that should have put him on the ground hours ago. The cauterized hole in his torso still leaking fluid through the seal. The broken fingers of his left hand wrapped around the axe handle, with nothing but willpower holding them closed. The infected wound in his side hot enough that he could feel his own fever like a furnace burning behind his eyes, the concussion ringing in his skull, and 100 smaller injuries that had blurred together into one continuous scream of pain that he had simply chosen to ignore. The first Kreth reached him and swung a blade arm that could have cut through ship plating. Kale stepped inside the arc of the blow and brought the war axe up in a short, brutal swing that caught the Kreth under the chin, and the alien's head snapped back, and it fell. The second Kreth came half a step behind the first, and Kale pivoted on his bad leg and swung the axe sideways, and the weight of it did most of the work, crashing through chitin armor and the body beneath it with a sound like a tree splitting in a storm. The breach was narrow, 4 meters, no more, and that was the only reason any of this was possible, because in an open field the Kreth would have surrounded him in seconds and pulled him apart. But here in the gap they could only come at him 2 or 3 at a time, and that turned the fight from a slaughter into something else. Something that 900 soldiers watched on their helmet cameras from the relay room behind. The barricaded doors. Something that the galaxy would watch 300 billion times in the weeks that followed. Kale fought the way humans have always fought, when everything is gone, with the raw primal fury of a species that spent 100,000 years clawing its way to the top of a food chain that had given it no natural advantages except the refusal to die. He swung the axe, and when the axe got stuck in a Kreth body, he ripped it free and swung again, and when a Kreth blade cut across his thigh and his leg buckled, he dropped to one knee and kept swinging from the ground. And when a Kreth grabbed the axe handle and tried to wrench it away, Kale headbutted the alien so hard that he felt something crack in his own skull, and the Kreth staggered, and Kale tore the axe back and split the creature open. Blood was running into his eyes, his own blood from the reopened scalp wound, and the world was a red blur, but the breach was only 4 meters wide. Kreth kept coming through it, and he kept killing them. A Kreth warclaw raked across his back and tore through armor and flesh, and he arched in pain and screamed, and turned the scream into a swing that took the attacker's arm off at the shoulder. A Kreth blade punched into his left side, the already infected side, and the pain was so extreme that his vision went white for a full second, and when the white cleared, he was still standing and still swinging, and the Kreth who had stabbed him was dead at his feet. He could feel his body shutting down, not all at once, but in stages, like lights going out in a building 1 floor at a time. His left arm went numb first, and he shifted the axe to a one-handed grip, and then his vision in the cybernetic eye flickered and died, and he was fighting with one eye in a world painted red with his own blood, and then his bad leg stopped responding entirely, and he braced it against a piece of rubble and turned himself into a fixed point that the Kreth had to go through and could not. Behind the barricaded doors, Syra watched the helmet cam feeds, and her 4 eyes were wide and wet with something that her species did not have a word for, because they had never needed one. It was the feeling of watching something impossible happen, and knowing that you were witnessing a moment that would divide history into before and after. Torsh was beside her, and the Kilani's scales had gone pale, which was something that only happened to his species in the presence of what they called a soul fire. A warrior whose spirit burned so hot that it could be felt by others like heat from a star. "How?" Torsh whispered. "How is he still standing?" Syra shook her head, because she did not have an answer that made sense in any framework she understood. The answer was simple, but it was a simplicity that no alien species had ever truly understood about humans. Kale was still standing because he had decided to still be standing. And that decision was not made in his muscles or his bones or his brain, but in some deeper place, where the human species kept the thing that had carried them out of the caves and across the oceans and into the stars. The thing that had no name in any alien language, because no other species had ever needed to develop it to the same degree. Stubbornness was too small a word. Will was closer, but still not enough. It was the absolute bedrock conviction that the universe did not get to decide when a human being was finished. Only the human got to decide that. And Kale had not decided yet. 3 minutes and 27 seconds. That was how long he held the breach alone against the Kreth war host. And in that time, he killed 31 warriors, and took wounds that the medical reports would later describe with a phrase that became famous across the galaxy. Injuries incompatible with continued consciousness in every known sapient species. Was still swinging when the sky split open. The Galactic Concordance relief fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly above Sereth Prime, and the first thing they did was paint the Kreth positions with orbital targeting lasers. And the second thing they did was fire. Columns of light came down from the heavens like the fingers of an angry god, and where they touched the jungle, the Kreth lines simply ceased to exist. Vaporized, scattered, blown apart in explosions that turned night into day and shook the moon to its core. The Kreth broke. For the first time in the battle, for the first time in many battles, the Kreth war host turned and ran. And their retreat was not orderly. It was panic, pure and animal. The panic of a force that had spent 14 days trying to crush a handful of defenders, and had been bled white for their trouble, and now saw death falling from the sky. Kale did not see the Kreth run. His body had finally reached the end of what even human stubbornness could demand of it, and he fell forward onto the pile of Kreth dead that filled the breach, and the war axe slipped from his fingers, and his one working eye closed, and his heart stopped beating. The medics found him 47 seconds later, buried under alien bodies, with his scarred hands still locked in the shape of a grip around a weapon that was no longer there. And they put electric current through his chest, and pumped him full of chemicals that forced his heart to remember its job. And his heart started again, reluctantly, like a soldier being ordered back to a post he had already died defending. He survived. He survived the way he had always survived, not gracefully, not cleanly, not without cost, but stubbornly and completely, and against every odd the universe could stack against him. The months that followed were a blur of medical bays and reconstruction surgeries, and the slow, painful work of teaching a body to function again. Had been broken in more places than anyone wanted to count. But while Kale healed, the galaxy changed. The helmet camera footage from the Battle of Sereth Prime spread across every network in known space within hours of the relief fleet's arrival, and within days it had been viewed more times than any combat recording in galactic history. 300 billion beings watched a single scarred human hold a breach against an army, and something shifted in the way the galaxy understood the species called humanity. The Galactic Concordance quietly updated its species classification database, and the entry for humans changed from minor threat, limited utility, to a new designation that had never been used before. Strategic-grade species do not engage in wars of attrition. The Kreth Dominion's Warlord Council convened an emergency session and issued a single standing order regarding human combatants that was distributed to every Kreth military unit in the galaxy. The order was one sentence long, and it was not a tactical directive. It was a warning. If a human is still standing, the battle is not over. Mercenary companies that had once laughed at human recruits began offering contracts that were 10 times what they had been, and human warriors who had been rated expendable class found themselves reclassified overnight. And the Hall of Brands on Valeth Co. established a new evaluation category that simply read human-grade endurance, because they had no other way to measure what they had seen. 1 year later, Cale Drennan returned to Valeth Co. He walked off the same docking ramp he had walked off a year before. But he was different now. Not unmarked, never unmarked. He had new scars layered over old ones, and his limp was heavier, and his cybernetic eye had been replaced with a better model that glowed steady blue instead of flickering red. A gift from Syra, who had told him she was tired of looking at cheap hardware in the face of the man who had saved her life and her company and possibly the war. He walked into the Hall of Brands, and the noise of 10,000 aliens filling the Colosseum tiers died as if someone had cut the sound. Silence spread outward from the entrance like a wave, row by row, tier by tier, until the entire vast arena was quiet, and every eye and sensor and optical organ in the building was fixed on the scarred human walking across the evaluation floor. The Telvanni assessor approached him, and the insectoid's compound eyes reflected Cale's image 1,000 times, and his mandibles trembled as he spoke. "What should we rate you?" the assessor asked, and his voice was not mocking now. It was careful and quiet, and edged with something that was not quite fear and not quite awe. Cale stood in the center of the hall where he had stood 1 year ago, in the exact spot where he had been laughed at and mocked and dismissed as expendable, and he looked up at the tiers of alien faces, Gorath and Velinari and Kalani and Drell and 100 other species, and he saw that the laughter was gone. In its place was something that looked like silence, but was not silence. It was the sound of an entire galaxy recalculating what it thought it knew about a small, scarred species from an unremarkable world orbiting an average star. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, for the first time since before the scars, before the wars, before the long, bloody years of surviving when everyone around him did not, Cale Drennan smiled. It was a small smile, tired and human and real. "Human," he said. "Rate me human. That has always been enough." He turned and walked toward the exit, and his footsteps echoed in the silent hall. And no one moved, and no one spoke. And then, as he reached the doorway, a sound began. Not laughter, never again laughter, but the rhythmic impact of fists and claws and limbs, striking chests and armor. In the warrior salutes of every species present, a thunder of respect that built and built until it shook the walls of the Hall of Brands, and spilled out into the corridors beyond, and was heard on the docking levels and in the merchant quarters, and all the way down to the lowest decks of Valeth Kokale. Did not turn around. He kept walking with his steady limp, and his scarred hands, and his tired blue eye, and his small human smile, walking into the corridor and through the crowds that parted for him, walking toward whatever war was next, whatever impossible stand was waiting, whatever fight the galaxy would need a human for. Because that was what humans did. They got knocked down, and they got up. They got hurt, and they kept going. They got mocked, and they proved the mockers wrong. And when the universe told them to stay down, to give up, to accept that they were small and soft and breakable, they stood up one more time, and they walked forward. They turned their scars into stories, and their pain into purpose, and their stubborn, furious refusal to quit into something that looked from the outside very much like legend. The thunder of the warrior salute followed him all the way to the docks. He did not need to hear it. He had never fought for applause. He had fought because that was what humans did. They fought, and they bled, and they survived, and they carried their scars not as marks of shame, but as proof of the one thing that mattered more than strength or speed or power. They endured, and that had always been enough.